the 6th Annual Lay-Clergy Institute of First Congregational Church, Longmont, Colorado. Dr. Howard Thurman led the Institute, speaking on the general theme, The Dilemmas of the Human Spirit. This tape is Dr. Thurman's lecture of Monday evening, April the 2nd, entitled The Dilemma of Life and Death. Dr. Thurman is introduced by Reverend Terrell Schweitzer, Associate Pastor of First Church.
This evening we have both the joy and the sorrow of having Dr. Howard Thurman share with us some of his insights into the meaning and the understanding of life. Joy, I would say, because it is always a joy to be permitted, I was going to say to be permitted to hear Dr. Thurman speak, but it might be more apropos to say to be permitted to listen to him think. And I would say sorrow because this will be his last evening with us on this trip. And sorrow, which I might parenthetically add, is probably of our own making because we would selfishly keep him here with us if only we could do so. It is always difficult, for me at least, to introduce another person, for introductions should tell something about the other person, who they are. But this, of course, is entirely impossible. One simply cannot tell someone else who this third party is. And having said that, I think if I had an ounce of integrity, I would quit at this very moment and allow Dr. Thurman to speak. But unfortunately, I am devoid of any integrity whatsoever, even that very small amount of it. While I cannot tell you and would not presume to tell you who Dr. Howard Thurman is, what I would do, if I might, is to tell you something of what Dr. Thurman is to me. He has been variously described as a philosopher, a poet, a mystic, a theologian, a scholar, and I would suppose he is indeed all of these things and probably much more beside. But to me, he is a member of that most honored and what I feel to be the oldest profession of humanity, and that, incidentally, is not to be confused with what is usually assumed to be the oldest profession of humanity. Rather, what I would refer to as the person that has been described in earlier history as the sage, or as I would prefer to call them, the storyteller. For the storyteller is and always has been the one to whom the family or the clan comes and turns to ask those very great and personal and pertinent and very crucial questions of life and of its meaning. Perhaps one of the greatest illustrations of the storyteller were those who lived so many years ago, whose answers to these very same questions are now found in those first chapters of the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. The situation in which they shared their wisdom with the brethren is not described in Genesis, but in my mind, I wonder if maybe it might not have gone something like this. The family, the clan had gathered together in whatever abode that they were living in. They were probably seated around a fire. And I would perceive this as being nighttime. The work of the day had now been completed. The hunting, the gathering of food, finished. And I would perceive it to be during the course of the evening meal, or maybe the evening meal had just been completed and one of the youngsters, for isn't it always one of the youngsters who disturb the peacefulness of their elders with those very pertinent or maybe impertinent, at least very troublesome questions. And I would perceive one of the youngsters turning and asking, how is it that we are here? Or maybe, from whence have we come? And after listening to the response of the family storyteller, given out of the wisdom and experience of his day and age. In all probability, the youngster followed with another question, or maybe it was a second youngster at this point, who might have asked the question, why is it that we are here? Or maybe, to where do we go? In essence, asking those great questions, what is the meaning of life for me and for all others? These questions of humanity continue to be current. They remain for each generation to again ask and to answer for itself out of the knowledge and the wisdom, out of the experience of its day and age. As was the case with our fathers and our forefathers before them, and as truly will be the case with our children and our children's children, tonight we too are privileged once again to gather together as a family, to share together as the clan, and to have one of our greatest storytellers share with us that which he has found in his search for the answer to these always contemporary questions. For the task of the storyteller is the same this night as it has been on all other nights. It is to tell once again the story of humanity. It is to tell the story of the faith, and in so doing, I think, to tell the story of oneself. Dr. Thurman does each of these things eminently well, but I think he is one of the most unique of all storytellers. For in doing this, he somehow enables each of us not only to understand, but enables each of us somehow to also tell our own stories. Dr. Thurman.
Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. O Sabbath rest by Galilee, O calm of hills above, where Jesus knelt to share with thee the silence of eternity, interpreted by love. Amen. Before I begin, permit me to express my very simple appreciation and joy because of these very fateful days that it has been my privilege to live in your midst. At a time in the history of the world when so often there is so much that casts down and often so little that uplifts and inspires. I find myself hugging very tightly to my body with a kind of quiet enthusiasm. Those experiences in which there was a flowing of life, rich with meaning. And these I remember at other times when life is very hard and the days are very difficult. So, I thank you for giving me that kind of memory, and I rejoice in it. Tonight, our time together is divided into two parts. The first, I have three things I want to read. And I want to read them not merely because I think they are very important and relevant to the process of my own thinking about the dilemma of life and death. But it is one form of insurance that if I read these three things, and after that you don't get anything else, you will have this. Because I have loved life, I shall have no sorrow to die. I have set up my gladness on wings to be lost in the blue of the sky. I have run and leaped with the rain. I have taken the wind to my breast. My cheek, like a drowsy child, to the face of the earth I have pressed. Because I have loved life, I shall have no sorrow to die. I have kissed young love on the lips. I have heard his song to the end. I have struck my hand like the seal in the loyal hand of a friend. I have known the peace of heaven, the comfort of work done well. I have longed for death in the darkness and risen alive out of hell. Because I have loved life, I shall have no sorrow to die. I give a share of my soul to the world where my course is run. I know that another shall finish the task I must leave undone. I know that no flower, no flint was in vain on the path I trod. As one looks on a face through a window, through life, I have looked on God. Because I have loved life, I shall have no sorrow to die. And the second, I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I hear him leading his horse out of the stall. I hear the clatter on the barn floor. Death is in haste. He has business in Cuba, business in the Balkans, many calls to make this morning. but I will not hold the bridle while he cinches the girth. And he may mount by himself. I will not give him a leg up. Though he flicks my shoulder with his whip, I will not tell him which way the fox ran. With his hoof on my breast, I will not tell him where the black boy hides in the swamp. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. I am not on death's payroll. I will not tell him the whereabouts of my friends, nor of my enemies either. Though he promise me much, I will not map him the route to any man's door. Am I a spy in the land of the living, that I should deliver men to death? Brother, the password and the plans of our city are safe with me. Never through me shall you be overcome. I shall die, but that is all that I shall do for death. And then finally, this is taken from the introduction to Bernard Shaw's Back to Methuselah. The captain says to Lavinia, what you are facing is certain death. You have nothing left now but your faith and this craze of yours, this Christianity. Are your Christian fairy stories any truer than our stories about Jupiter and Diana? Lavinia, a man cannot die for a story and a dream. None of us believe the dreams and stories more devoutly than Spinthal, but he could not face the great reality. What he would have called my faith has been oozing away minute by minute, whilst I have been sitting here with reality becoming more and more real, with stories and dreams fading away into nothing. Captain, are you then going to die for nothing? Lavinia, yes, that is the wonderful thing. It is since all the stories, all the dreams have gone, that I have now no doubt that all that I must die for is something greater than dreams and stories. But for what? I don't know. If it were for anything small enough to know, it would be too small to die for. I think I'm going to die for God. Nothing else is really enough to die for. What is God? Said the captain. When we know that, Captain, said Lavinia, we shall be gods ourselves. I think of life always in two dimensions. These are demonic things. Now I start over. I think of life always in two dimensions. First, as life contrasted with death. Life and death, twins, the ebb and flow of one basic rhythm. Life, death, one creative continuum in which all life participates. And then I think of life as containing both life and death. Something that, how to say it, something that contains both life and death. Life contrasted with death. Time, space, the living heartbeat of experience, and then the end of that heartbeat. And then there's a sense in which life contains both life and death as units, as aspects of one total experience. You may recall that sometime since I've been here, either last night or one of the nights or one of the mornings, I suggested that the thing that seems to me most impressive and perhaps most unmanageable to my mind is the fact that life is alive, and that life does not die. And I suggested to you that perhaps one of the basic elements which go to make up this notion in my head is the fact that particular expressions of life die. You will die, I will die, but man does not die. Man keeps coming on, because life is alive. And no expression of life can quite contain what life is. If I were to ask you, for instance, name one thing, one expression of you, one manifestation of you which totally represented you, what would you select? Can you think of any expression of your life that contains all that you mean by you? Can you think of any word that you use to convey an idea that quite says what you have in mind? For instance, when I was 5, I imagine, I said to my mother, Mama, I love you. And when I was 10, if no fellows were around, I said to her, Mama, I love you. And then when I was 15, I said to her, Mama, I love you. And when I was 20, I used the same words. When I was 25, I used the same words. And when she was dying at 70, the last thing I said to her as she was dying was, Mama, remember, I love you. All the time, I had been using the same words. Mama, I love you. The same 4 words. But there was a desert and a sea of difference between what I said to her as a grown, mature man and what I said to her when I was 5 years old. Same words. And if she lived to be 1,000 years old and I lived to be 800 years old, I would still be trying to say it, because I can't quite squeeze into any expression of my life what I mean, what I'm saying, or what I mean by what I'm saying. So that there is an aspect of life, and just sort of stick along with me as I wade through this, because I have to, and you don't have any choice. You see, man is a binder of time. There is an aspect of you that can never be quite contained in anything you may be experiencing. For instance, since you've been sitting here now, looking in this direction, some of you have been back home wondering whether or not you turn the fire off the stove, or whether or not you locked your car, or going into tomorrow, or going into 9 o'clock, wondering whether I will last longer than 9 o'clock. But all the time, you were sitting right here looking straight at me. There is an aspect of your personality that cannot be contained in any place, any spot, anywhere, anything. A part of you that stands outside of the events of your life. A part of you that is you observing you doing what you are doing. A part of you is looking at you sitting in the pew. Now, of course, if that break between you, the observer, and you, the participant, becomes too wide, then you have to see the shrink. But this is characteristic of personality. You are a time binder. You play future, past. You go back and forth. You go through a door, through a window, through the ceiling. You play time and space as the musician plays the organ keys. Outside, watching. And every experience of your life, therefore, is what is called an event. So that man's experience of life is eventful. Your life is made up of events. But some part of you is always standing outside of the events. All right, now you get the setting. Death as contrasted with life. The life-death rhythm. The life-death twins. These make up that which is eventful. These are part of the events of your life. And if it is true then that you stand always outside of the event, then even death cannot contain all that you are. So that in man's experience of death, he observes himself participating in the event. Some part of man is untouched by the event, so that I may be aware up to the very moment that I take my last breath, I may be aware of the fact that I'm dying and that I have died. Yet all experience, Ulysses says, is an arch where through gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. Now the next step. if it be true, as I think it is, that I am never quite contained, even in the act or the experience of dying, because death is a part of the eventful schema of man's experience. The panic, the dread, the fear, the anxiety that broods over the common life in the contemplation of death is not at this point. And I don't mean to be depressing tonight, so but the fear, the dread, that's the word I want. The dread of death is at 2 points. One, it is very difficult for one to think of oneself as the subject of death. When we read a part of a syllogism which says, all men die, that's one thing. But when I say, I too must die, that's another thing. It is difficult to deal emotionally with oneself as the subject. Not too difficult to deal with someone else as the subject. Now, the second and most important part of the dread is that there is something about death that seems to be, and listen very carefully, there's something about death which seems to be a denial of the future. This is the source of the dread. For you see, if there be no future, then the present has no significance and the past no meaning. For what we mean by the present is simply the point at which the past and the future meet and greet each other. That's the present right there. Have you seen ants crawling up an ant, this thing. And any time one ant passes another ant, what do? They do this, just this, and pass on. They never just pass. Now that little touch, that's what the present is. The past and the future meet and greet each other. That's the present. Now, if there is a denial of the future, as death seems to imply, then it is more than the spirit of man, more than the mind of man can manage, so that all great religions know that they cannot address themselves to the deepest and most searching needs and demands of the human spirit unless they deal with this central problem. How can death keep from being to us a denial of the future? What can I do? That's the word. What can I do that can immunize me against this dread of the loss of the future, this dread inherent in the notion of death, that death is a denial of the future. Now, we deal with this in many ways. In all great religions, whole systems of theologies and whole doctrines, whole dogmas are geared to deal with this central core of trauma, of the human spirit as it contemplates death. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth on me shall never die. That's the way Christianity deals with the dread that is inherent in man's experience of death as a denial of the future. Now, let's back up and come at it from another angle. The contradictions of life seem so final. I remember once I had tonsillitis, and my first hospital experience, years and years and years ago, and the doctor painted my throat with silver nitrate. And I amused myself by trying to remember how my throat felt when it didn't hurt. And I couldn't. This hurt simply dominated my whole horizon. Because the contradiction seemed final and ultimate. But there's something in the human spirit that is never willing to accept the contradictions of life as being final. Even in the book, in our book, in which there is etched in very dramatic form the ultimate dualism, heaven, hell, as if to say by implication and by direction that the contradictions of life are really final. That the contradictions of life are really ultimate. And the form that this takes in the development of Christian thought is heaven, hell. And yet tucked away in the book is another phrase. There shall come a time when God will be all and in all. When the dualisms run out. When the contradictions exhaust themselves. And God will be all and in all. But one of the ministries of religion is to address itself to this central problem. All right. Now, there are other ways by which we seek to deal with it. We try, how to say this? We try to guarantee in some way, by attaching ourselves to material things, to deal with this question. That will guarantee that we will participate in the future, that even when we die, that death will not be a denial of the future. Some way we will continue. And one of the deceptions of materialism is right here. It is a sober thing to realize that your automobile, that may be a bad illustration, but, well, let's say it, that your automobile will be around here when you aren't. You know, and if somehow you could find a way to insinuate yourself into what seems to be the permanent dimension of things, then if you can identify yourself with the thing, then you can fling defiance into the teeth of this aspect of death, which insists that when you die, this is a denial of the future, so I will go on and on. There's something so very deceptive about things. I've written somewhere about my experience in this regard. When I was a student in seminary, I had an Ingersoll watch. There may be some of you who are old enough to know what I mean when I say an Ingersoll watch. And it ticked like an alarm clock. And in the days when I was very young and trying to develop a kind of form of presentation, and so I would take my watch out and put it up on the pulpit, as I'd seen other prestigious ministers do. And the pulpit became a sounding board. And the people who sat along in the front could hear this Ingersoll watch tick, 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 tick. And one of my friends, who was blessed with an abundance of economic goods, said, I think those long silences that you have should not be interrupted by this. So he bought me an Elgin white gold watch, and I'd have to put it up to my ear to hear it tick. Now, all during the period, during the Ingersoll watch period, I had a study group of maids and cooks and domestic servants 2 miles across town in Rochester, and I would go over there twice a week, and they were not off from work until about 10 o'clock. So we'd have this discussion group over sandwiches until midnight. And then I would walk back the 2 miles to the seminary, but the streetcars had stopped running, and I'd make all the shortcuts through all the alleys, getting back to the seminary as quickly as possible. But after I had this gold watch, I would only walk down lighted streets. This is the subtle thing that happens. If I can identify myself with that which seems to fling defiance into the teeth of time, then I can immunize myself against the possibility that death for me will not be a denial of the future. And so we spend much of our time and energy with all of the creative efforts available to us, working out details which have to do with a future into which we shall not go, but details which in some way will deal with the threat that death is about the denial of the future. And of course, this is one of the roles of children in families. Now, the next step. I don't know how to say this. Perhaps the greatest discovery that the Spirit makes, the Spirit of man makes in the experience with death is this: that death is not the worst thing in the world. That there are some things in life that are worse than death.